They expected awe. That was the first mistake. When the imperial delegation arrived, draped in silver robes and flanked by six-legged guards with plasma rifles for arms, every major government on Earth rolled out whatever version of a red carpet they had left. The aliens, tall, shimmering, symmetrical to the point of discomfort, called themselves the Olyari Dominion. Old empire. Thousands of conquered systems, billions of subjugated species, endless, polished arrogance. But the Olyari hadn't prepared for Earth's first official reply, spoken through a translator device in front of a UN delegation, a live stream, and 3.8 billion online viewers. A chuckle. Not a word. Not a diplomatic greeting. Just a laugh. Low, amused, human. That man. Nobody remembers his name. And maybe that's for the best. But he stood there, watching these galactic overlords try to look terrifying, and he laughed. One man laughed so hard, tears streamed down his face. He wasn't trying to be disrespectful. He genuinely couldn't stop. He had just seen so much of this before. The posture, the arrogance, the implied threat. It looked exactly like every tyrant Earth had already buried. The aliens didn't take it well. The Olyari emissary stepped forward, eyes glowing from some kind of neural enhancement, and demanded obedience in a dozen dialects. He listed their weapons, their conquests, the weight of their fleet. Said Earth would be absorbed, integrated, civilized. Humanity responded with memes. Seriously. Memes. By nightfall, Bombertort bow to your bug overlords was trending. A TikTok of a guy offering toast to a towering Olyari statue went viral. Late-night shows couldn't get enough of it. The Empire had no idea they'd walked into a world wired on sarcasm, cynicism, and 2 centuries of barely surviving itself. It wasn't bravery, not really. It was that Earth had run out of fear a long time ago. By day 3, the Olyari threatened a demonstration. They targeted a decommissioned naval base in the middle of nowhere and vaporized it. No warning. Just turned it to molten glass. 20 seconds. Then they broadcast it. That was the moment things should have changed. That's when most species would have crumbled. And maybe Earth would have, if the Empire hadn't accidentally picked a location right next to a wildlife preserve. They didn't just flatten a base. They killed an endangered population of red wolves on live television. That was the misstep, the fatal one. Suddenly it wasn't about dominance or diplomacy. It was about the wolves. Petitions flooded the net. Donations surged. Hackers took down Olyari comm systems across 3 sectors in retaliation. One man, a programmer with nothing but a grudge and a bottle of gin, leaked classified Olyari battle data he'd somehow cracked in 14 hours. He renamed the virus Fur Justice. Then the real fun began. Every threat the Olyari issued was mocked. Every demand answered with parody. They showed off a battleship that could level continents, so someone in Poland photoshopped it into a toaster ad. Their leader, the Imperator Supreme, addressed the globe. 30 minutes later, his speech was re-edited into a cooking tutorial for how to cook empirical humility. The Olyari didn't understand. They couldn't. Power meant fear. Obedience, silence. Every other species had followed the pattern. They didn't know how to process resistance that didn't come with missiles and fleets, but with ridicule. They pushed harder, decrees, threats, more demonstrations. But every time they tried to strike terror, Earth struck back with something worse. Laughter. It wasn't childish mockery. It was something sharper. A kind of ancient, brutal coping mechanism forged through too many wars, too many dictators, too many broken promises. The human mind had stopped folding under pressure long ago. Now, it cracked sideways. And once you're laughing at your enemy, you're already imagining how to bury them. At first, I thought it was a joke, a bad one. The kind the internet cooks up in the middle of a crisis to keep itself from imploding. But it wasn't a joke. The Empire actually asked for Earth's unconditional surrender via a YouTube comment. No official broadcast, no press release, just some Olyari Jr. ambassador, probably trying to be clever, typed it under a live-streamed reaction video titled, "Alien Emperor tries to look scary, fails hilariously, re-upload." It had 2 million views in 8 hours. Pinned at the top was the Empire's command. "You will submit to integration. Resistance is illogical. Your humor is inefficient. End transmission." The top reply, "LOL, okay, Dad." The second, "Imagine getting roasted by a species that invented pineapple pizza." I remember sitting in my apartment, surrounded by half-eaten takeout, 3 news feeds playing at once, and a laptop buzzing from Discord notifications. It should have felt like the beginning of the end. But all I could think was how utterly unprepared these intergalactic tyrants were. They expected fear. What they got was content. And I was right in the middle of it. My name doesn't matter. I wasn't anyone special. Just another analyst on the fringe of a military think tank that hadn't been taken seriously in years. They kept us around for predictions, simulations, just-in-case scenarios. We were the department you forgot existed, until everything hit the fan. They pulled us in the moment Earth realized this wasn't a drill. Our job wasn't to fight back with guns or ships. We didn't have the tech for that yet. It was to figure out why the Olyari were reacting the way they were, and how to turn that into a weapon. And God help me, we found it. The Olyari didn't just misunderstand humor. They were neurologically vulnerable to it. Laughter, especially the dark, mocking kind humans specialized in, caused stress reactions in their prefrontal cognition systems. Their species had evolved in a strictly hierarchical, ritualistic culture. Mockery was not just rare, it was neurologically disruptive. They didn't tease, they didn't joke, they didn't even lie creatively, which meant under pressure their brains locked up when faced with chaotic, illogical ridicule. Humans? We swam in that chaos. A week after the comment debacle, the Olyari sent another envoy. This one wore a gold-plated exosuit, spoke in perfect English, and came with a massive battleship parked in lunar orbit. They were done playing. He gave Earth 48 hours to comply or face tactical compliance, and that's when we flipped the switch. Every screen during the broadcast, TVs, phones, even public transit ads, glitched for 2 seconds. Then a human face appeared. Average-looking, early 30s, brown hoodie, deadpan expression, no name, no intro, just a single sentence. "Empire of what?" The video cut. Just that. 6 seconds long. It spread like wildfire. Memes exploded. People edited that phrase onto Roman statues, cereal boxes, baby onesies. Twitter, or whatever it was now called, erupted. The phrase hit global consciousness in under 12 hours. "Empire of what?" became humanity's war cry. The Olyari didn't get it. They analyzed it. They dissected it. They issued rebuttals through official channels, arguing that their empire spanned 8,000 worlds, governed trillions, preserved galactic balance. But it was too late. They had tried to argue with a meme, and we never let go. By week 3, their neural relays, some kind of high-frequency communication lattice that connected their command structures, started glitching. Reports came in of Olyari officers suffering emotional instability, speech delays, erratic commands. One of them broke down mid-speech and began screaming about illogical laughter patterns. We had infected them, not with a virus, not with weapons, but with doubt. And then came the man who broke them. He wasn't military, wasn't even in the government. Just a stand-up comic from Manchester, live streaming out of his garage with a broken mic and a bottle of whiskey. His name was Adam. No last name needed. He released a 30-minute rant called Alien Empires and Other Insecure Overcompensations. In it, he mocked the Olyari's tall helmets, their absurdly formal speech, the way their ships looked like giant, pretentious spoons. He compared their battle formations to synchronized swimmers having a stroke. He joked about how they vaporized a military base and thought that would scare a species that voluntarily lives in Florida. By the end, he wasn't just mocking their empire. He was dismantling their ego. He called them galactic theater kids with daddy issues. That clip reached the Olyari Home Council within hours. 2 of their planetary governors resigned. 3 ships deserted. A minor faction of their empire declared independence. And then, silence. The Olyari stopped broadcasting, stopped responding. No more threats, no more appearances. Their ships remained in orbit, unmoving, watching us like a stunned animal, unsure if the thing it bit was toxic or just suicidal. But we knew better. They weren't regrouping, they were spiraling. It was all in the body language. What little we could analyze from their non-verbal broadcasts. Their posture slouched, voice patterns slowed. They wore less armor, less ceremony. They'd been embarrassed at a biological level. Still, Command wanted leverage. Something final. A clean kill. So we gave it to them. We released the compilation. An 86-minute documentary, part satire, part real footage, chronicling every empire in Earth's history, from Rome to the British to the Silicon Valley monopolies. All of them built, all of them bloated, all of them collapsed. The video ended with one simple phrase. Empires don't end in fire, they end in jokes, and we aired it directly to the Olyari fleet. 3 days later, they initiated full retreat protocol. Didn't fire a shot, just left. Like a magician who'd lost control of his audience and couldn't remember the trick. Some say their entire cultural matrix began reforming after that. Others say we broke their spirit so badly, 3 sub-races seceded within a month. None of that mattered to me, though, because I knew the truth. We hadn't won because we were strong. We hadn't even won because we were clever. We won because we were broken in just the right way. Humor is a scar. That's all it is. A way for the human soul to show its wounds without bleeding to death. And the Olyari, they had no scars, no mess, no chaos. They never stood a chance. But victory didn't feel clean. Not for me. I kept thinking about the man who laughed first, the one who saw the Empire arrive and couldn't help himself. I wondered if he was still alive. If he'd watched the world burn in satire and realized what he'd started. Or maybe he'd just moved on, gone back to whatever life he had before. Not everyone wants to be a hero. Some people just want to laugh before the end. And this time, it wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something far stranger. Because now, we knew. We weren't the most advanced, we weren't the most powerful. But we were the one species in the galaxy that couldn't be ruled, not by fear, not by control, and sure as hell not by a race that thought sarcasm was a disease. We didn't survive because we were perfect. We survived because we were ridiculous, and in a galaxy ruled by empires, that might just be the deadliest trait of all. The first real silence came 5 days after the Olyari left. No ships, no transmissions. No veiled threats or demands wrapped in superiority, just quiet. And for a planet raised on noise, on constant updates, crises, doom-scrolling, and hot takes, it felt wrong. We won. We knew that. There were no debates about it. No battlefield was needed. We didn't crack their code. We broke their spirit. And somehow that made the victory even heavier. I was back in the bunker. Same screen, same flickering lights, same stale coffee and burnout humming behind my eyes. The war, if you could call it that, lasted less than a month. But it had changed everything. The department brought us back in, not to celebrate, to study, to understand what we'd unleashed. There were questions now. Ugly ones. Had we traumatized an empire? Had we committed a kind of psychological warfare no treaty had ever prepared for? Was the laughter a shield or a scalpel? I remember sitting in that cold, humming room, watching footage from orbit. The last Olyari ship leaving lunar range. Its hull flickered, the shielding stuttering, almost like it was limping. Their ships had personalities, the analysts said, built with a form of pseudo-biotech that reflected the mental state of the crew. That one looked bruised. I didn't laugh. I hadn't laughed in days. Maybe it was the guilt. Maybe just the aftermath sinking in. It's easy to smile when the threat is there, when mocking the enemy feels like resistance. But once the threat is gone, and you're left staring at what you did, the punchline fades. Something shifted across the planet, too. The memes kept rolling. Sure, but they started getting darker, less funny, more bitter. Empire got ratioed into extinction. Imagine losing to a species that eats Tide Pods. We bullied aliens into a mental breakdown, peak Earth moment. People were proud, and they were scared of what that pride meant. Not everyone thought we should have fought back like this. Some said we'd awakened something in the galaxy, a new kind of warfare, a psychological virus no one could contain. There were protests, quiet ones at first, small groups holding signs, "Not in our name." Satire isn't strategy. Mockery is not morality. They got shouted down, of course. The masses weren't ready to feel bad about winning. Not yet. But under the celebration, something ugly started to grow. We began getting pings, strange ones, broadcasts that didn't match any known language or pattern. Not Olyari. Not any of the smaller trading factions we knew existed. These signals were fragmented, coded, rhythmic. We ran it through every decryption algorithm we had. AI struggled to make sense of it, until someone suggested we feed it not into translation software, but into a joke database. That's when things got weird. Patterns emerged, setups, punchlines, structures resembling humor, but twisted, stilted, like someone trying to copy human satire, without understanding the core. They were trying to learn it. That's when it hit us. The Olyari weren't gone. They were studying us. That night, I walked through downtown alone. Screens still flickered with remixes of the victory. One giant billboard played that old 6-second clip on loop. Empire of what? The first time I saw it, I laughed so hard I spilled beer on my keyboard. Now, it felt like a threat. We hadn't just driven them away. We'd humiliated them in front of the entire galactic web. The Olyari had broadcasted their arrival to thousands of species, demanding awe, respect, and submission. What they got instead was humanity in all its broken, sarcastic glory. The Empire had ruled for millennia, not with passion, not with innovation, but with control. And Earth had just taught them the one thing they'd never prepared for: chaos in a hoodie with a smirk. That couldn't be ignored. Back at the department, simulations were running day and night. I remember one night watching a new projection roll out. It wasn't about invasion this time, it was about adaptation. Scenario: Olyari re-engage Earth within 6 months, not with fleets, but with media. In this simulation, they don't conquer, they infiltrate, they mimic. They learn humor. That was the fear now, because if they learned how to laugh like us, truly laugh, they'd be unstoppable. They wouldn't just invade, they'd trend. Around the world, nations scrambled to control the narrative. Diplomatic channels opened quietly. A new committee was formed. GPHW, Global Psychological Human Warfare. I sat in on the first meeting. One general, red-eyed and bitter, leaned forward and said, "We won with jokes, but if they come back with better ones, we're screwed." He wasn't wrong. Our edge wasn't tech, wasn't ships. It was cultural insanity. We wore trauma like armor, laughed through pain, turned horror into punchlines because we'd run out of tears centuries ago. But that kind of madness, once studied, once copied, was a double-edged sword. And we had no monopoly on madness. Then came the leak. Someone, still don't know who, released footage from inside the Olyari retreat, smuggled by one of the deserters. It showed a training program. Thousands of Olyari children lined up in holopods, watching Earth videos, sitcoms, news bloopers, stand-up, meme compilations, even prank channels. They were reprogramming their species to feel shame, to feel irony. It broke me. We hadn't just defeated them, we'd infected them. Not with hope, not with humanity, with human pain disguised as laughter. That's when I walked away from the job. I couldn't be part of it anymore. Not when I saw what we were becoming. We had every right to fight back, sure, but what we did wasn't defense. It was indoctrination by humiliation. It was war via meme. And maybe we won. But what did we become in the process? Months passed. The internet moved on. New trends. New wars, climate flare-ups, celebrity scandals. But I couldn't forget. I spent my nights watching the stars, wondering which one hid the Olyari fleet, wondering what version of humor they were building out there, whether it was better, darker, sharper, whether we'd survive our own reflection. Then, one day, it happened. A signal. Crystal clear. Unencrypted. It played across every screen, every frequency, just one sentence. We get the joke now. No ships followed. No demands. Just the message. And laughter. Low. Mechanical. Repeating. It wasn't human. Not quite. But it was close enough to send a chill through my spine. Because now, the game had changed. We taught them to laugh, and they'd never stop again. When the message aired, we get the joke now? I was sitting in a bar no one under 40 ever stepped into. Dim lights, real wood. Dust that hadn't moved in years. The kind of place that smelled like regret and old cigars. The bartender was half listening to the game, some local sport no one cared about anymore, when the screen above him cut to static. Then the sentence appeared. White text, black screen. Simple. We get the joke now. And then came the sound. Laughter. But not human. Not even close. The tone was too flat, too deliberate. Like someone had studied what laughter was supposed to sound like, then programmed it into a machine that had never once felt joy. The room froze. Glasses didn't clink, chairs didn't move. Even the guy at the end of the bar who talked to no one looked up. The screen blinked once, then again. Silence returned. The bartender said, "That wasn't real, right?" I couldn't answer him. My throat was locked, because in that brief sound, that not laugh, I heard something deeper than mimicry. I heard understanding, or worse, intent. I didn't sleep that night. I thought maybe I'd gotten away. I had quit, left the analysis teams, ghosted the inboxes, deleted the classified copies, tried to go back to living like the world hadn't cracked open under its own sarcasm. But the war had followed me. At 3:22 a.m., I got a ping. Not from a person. From an interface I thought was long disconnected. Old clearance levels, deep black access, the kind that doesn't call you unless the world's about to twist again. I hesitated. Then answered. The face that came up wasn't human. It was synthetic, stylized, faceless. But it spoke with the voice of my old department director. "We need you back." "No," I said, "I'm out." "Then you need to hear this." He played a clip. It started like another late-night show. Grainy footage, a host with slicked-back hair, a laugh track. But something was off. The host's movements were too precise, too rehearsed. The audience's laughter hit the same note every time. Then the camera cut to a close-up. The host wasn't human. He was Olyari, painted in foundation, hairline grafted, contacts in place. But the bone structure, the teeth, the way the mouth moved slightly out of sync. Not us. The director's voice came back. They're broadcasting it to fringe colonies, disconnected Earth settlements, unregulated systems. They're building a parallel culture, one that looks like ours, feels like ours, but isn't. I stared at the screen. They're not just mocking us, I said. They're becoming us. The line went quiet for a second. Then he said, worse. They're filtering us. The next 72 hours blurred. They flew me to a deep-sea archive base off the Azores, not because it was safe, but because it was disconnected. Not just from the net, from patterns. You couldn't risk long-range signals anymore, not when laughter had become a weapon you couldn't trace. In the cold belly of that place, we watched what the Empire had been broadcasting across the galaxy. Comedy specials, satirical news, parodies of Earth politics, Earth warfare, Earth culture, remixed through an alien filter that removed all our contradictions, all our guilt, all our humanity. It was flawless mimicry. So good it was horrifying. Because it wasn't meant for us, it was for the galaxy. The Olyari weren't retaliating with ships or threats anymore. They were weaponizing the very thing that destroyed them. Humor. But now it wasn't spontaneous. It was structured. They had taken the sharp chaos of human satire and turned it into controlled demolition. In one clip, an Olyari comedian joked about Earth's first contact being like introducing meth to a kindergarten. In another, they mocked Earth history, turning our wars, genocides, and scandals into tight, punchy one-liners. It was funny, terrifyingly funny, because the audience was laughing. And none of them were human. Back on the surface, the headlines were still talking about inflation, elections, and the usual noise. Earth hadn't noticed yet. Not really. But the undercurrent was shifting. Foreign markets, trade colonies, neutral zones were starting to favor Olyari entertainment over Earth's. Human culture was being out-humored by the very empire we broke. In some colonies, kids didn't know the difference. They'd watch a clip of an Olyari host roasting Earth's primitive history and think it was just another edgy channel. They didn't realize they were watching propaganda with a laugh track. And the punchline, it was working, because it wasn't about us anymore. It was about how the galaxy saw us, once feared. Now, mocked. They flipped the narrative. We tried to fight back, counter-content, campaigns, real human stories, pain, sacrifice, truth. But nothing landed. Nothing stuck. Because nothing beats a joke when the world's already tired of tragedy. The final blow came when they impersonated Adam, the comic from Manchester. The guy who'd gone viral for tearing the Empire down with wit sharper than any blade. They made a synthetic version of him. Perfect voice, identical face, flawless delivery. And this version? He apologized. He stood on a clean stage, blinking at a fake audience, and said, "Maybe we were wrong. Maybe mocking the galaxy wasn't brave. It was just sad." It wasn't real, but the galaxy believed it. Dozens of factions began pulling support from Earth's communications net. Entertainment pipelines closed. Our signal got weaker, faded under the weight of well-edited alien sarcasm. We had trained our enemies in the art of the punchline. And now we were the joke. I sat alone again. Same bar, different night, different air. The bartender nodded to me, nervous. "You seen this new Olyari bit? The one where they reenact the first human laugh? It's brutal." I nodded. I'd seen it. It portrayed the first laugh as a malfunction, a glitch, as if humanity's entire strength had been a flaw the Empire simply hadn't patched. The final scene? The Olyari actor turns to the camera, grinning with artificial warmth. He says, "Thanks for the laugh, we needed it." Then the screen cuts to black. A joke with no punchline. Just a quiet, cold end. And in that moment, I realized something horrifying. They didn't just get the joke, they owned it. You'd think we'd go kinetic at some point. Blow something up, send a fleet, try to show teeth again since humor no longer worked. But no. We didn't launch missiles. We held meetings, committees, panels, think tanks, academics flying in from every corner of the world, sitting in sleek glass buildings with their degrees and nervous smiles, asking the same damn question in 500 variations. How do we get the laugh back? You could feel the desperation underneath. No one said it outright, but it hung in every room like static. We're losing ourselves. It started subtle. Earth comedy circuits stopped getting traction. Shows got canceled, not from outrage, but disinterest. Our edge was dull. Our stories recycled. Our punchlines felt strained. Even the darkest jokes felt tired, artificial, like we were trying to mimic ourselves and failing. And worse, the Olyari weren't. They were getting better, more natural, less uncanny. We intercepted a stream out of a fringe system. Comedians in Olyari form hosting what looked like a game show. One contestant had to guess whether a human historical event was real or a fabricated nightmare. Did humans once build a nuclear weapon, then test it in the same atmosphere they breathe? Correct. Yes, they did. Cue audience laughter. Not sarcastic. Genuine. They were starting to understand us, not just mimic, not just reflect, actually feel it. And once they felt it, they weren't just laughing with us anymore. They were laughing at us. That was the tipping point. My name, still not important, is now listed in 5 sealed files. I shouldn't be writing any of this. But I was there when the final project was greenlit. Not a weapon, not a tech marvel. A silence. The codename was Dead Air. It was a psychological black zone initiative. If laughter no longer gave us power, then we'd remove it, entirely. No more comedy exports. No more irony-based diplomacy. Earth would go dark in every galactic channel. No transmissions, no satire, no memes, no interviews, skits, parodies, influencers, or performers of any kind. The theory was simple. If humanity's unpredictability came from its humor, and now that humor had been cloned, then our only weapon left was absence. Dead air wasn't just a retreat. It was a message. A galaxy used to fearing our laughter now had to face something worse. What does it mean when humans go quiet? I was embedded with one of the 3 cultural sterilization units. Sounds fancy? In reality, it meant walking into old creative hubs, satellite channels, podcast studios, meme farms, and pulling the plug. People resisted, not violently, just bitterly. Sad, confused. Some thought we were caving, others believed we were killing the last good part of ourselves. And maybe we were. I remember one woman in Prague ran a subnetwork that made deep satire content. Mostly post-ironic news remixes, darkly clever stuff. I handed her the shutdown order and expected a fight. She just looked at me and said, "You don't kill the noise, you become it." I didn't know what she meant until weeks later. The Dead Air Protocol went live planet-wide on day 300 post-withdrawal. At midnight GMT, every Earth-based signal went black. Just a plain white screen with one line. No comment. Then, nothing. For the first time in a century, Earth was offline, voluntarily, no jokes, no commentary, no sarcasm, just silence. The response came faster than expected. 3 hours after blackout, 22 Olyari feeds began broadcasting emergency updates. Not military alerts, cultural disturbances. Apparently, a sharp spike in unrest hit 4 of their core systems. Entire sectors panicked. Rebellion rumors flared. Why? Because without human content, their entire system of control began to wobble. You see, the Olyari hadn't just copied our humor. They'd built their infrastructure around it. Their updated political speeches followed satirical pacing. Their education systems used irony as a teaching model. Their news platforms relied on sarcasm to neutralize panic. It was all structured chaos based on us. And when we went silent, they lost the script. No human presence, no frame of reference. Their mimicked culture turned in on itself. Some of them began asking dangerous questions. Why are we laughing at them if they're not saying anything anymore? Is this what they wanted? Did we become the joke? One Olyari official resigned on live stream, staring into the lens and whispering, "They're waiting." We had become a void, and the galaxy couldn't look away. Even on Earth, people began to feel it. We stopped talking, and it hurt. It was like holding your breath, but emotionally. Like swallowing your tongue every time you wanted to scream for a species that survived genocide, collapse, and climate death with a raised eyebrow and a punchline. Silence was hell, but it was working. The Empire was unraveling, not in a firestorm, but in confusion. Their laughter had nowhere to bounce anymore. They'd stolen our weapon, turned it into doctrine, and we just let go of it. Now they were laughing into the void, and the void wasn't laughing back. That's when the contact came. Not a threat, not a plea, but a recording. A single line of dialogue sent through a back-channel protocol, encrypted using an old Earth codec, like someone had gone digging through our archives. The message? We missed the noise. It was signed by someone named Threk Vassal, an Olyari defector. He wasn't military, not political either. He was a writer. He'd been producing human-style shows for the Empire, but without fresh input, without us, he said the comedy started to rot, get bitter, meaner, darker, like they were chewing old jokes and spitting out poison. He begged us to come back, to say something. He said their society was fragmenting into two factions. The laughers, those who believed humor should evolve and conquer with them. The watchers, those who believed humans had left something behind in the silence, and were terrified of what it meant. Threk said the watchers were gaining ground, that they needed Earth's voice back to stabilize things. I didn't know whether to laugh or be horrified. They needed our sarcasm like they needed air, and we were killing them by withholding it. A summit was held on Mars, not Earth. Too symbolic. It was small, quiet, no cameras, no signals. Just thinkers, soldiers, and a few of us who'd been there when it all began. The debate was ugly. Some wanted to burn it all, let the Olyari collapse into their own echo chamber. Others feared what would come out of that collapse, what filled the void when satire failed. Me? I said one thing. We don't win by being quiet. We win by being honest, not clever, not sharp, not layered in irony, just honest. The laughter worked because it was real, because Earth bled, cried, screamed, and still found a way to joke about it. But that pain, that truth, had been missing since the day we started weaponizing it. Maybe the Empire didn't need more punchlines. Maybe it needed the pause between them. That's when we sent the last message. A single human voice. No effects, no edits, no sarcasm. It said, "We weren't laughing because we were brave. We were laughing because we were broken. Are you broken yet?" And then we waited. The silence after our message wasn't like before. It wasn't strategy, it was fear, and not ours. For the first time, the Olyari Empire, or whatever fragmented network was still pretending to wear its name, didn't know what to say. Not with words, not with humor, not with anything. They just paused. We had sent them the truth, raw and blunt. We weren't laughing because we were brave. We were laughing because we were broken. Are you broken yet? And that broke something in them. You could feel it ripple, through signals, satellites, defected colonies, even the trading hubs out near the helix swirl. They didn't respond with punchlines or mockery this time. No sarcastic re-edits, no synthetic comedians parodying our pain. They just stopped laughing. And that's when the real collapse began. 2 weeks after the message went out, one of their laugh farms, yes, they built those, imploded. Not literally, psychologically. These were massive holodomes where content was tested, analyzed, and optimized for galactic consumption. It was where they created laughter on command, where they turned pain into punchlines without ever feeling it. The entire sector went offline. Survivors, mostly low-ranking neural engineers, claimed the system itself began feeding recursive loops. Jokes layered within jokes, irony nested so deeply no one knew what was real anymore. It collapsed the minds of anyone still hooked into the network. A mass nervous breakdown, broadcast live before the signal cut. One analyst called it a satirical supernova. I called it karma, but not the clean kind, not the righteous kind. The kind that stinks of guilt. I got dragged back in, not by command, by instinct. When a war turns philosophical, it stops being about orders. You show up because you know it's going to burn without you, and part of you wants to watch it burn. We tracked the second major collapse to what used to be the Olyari Central Artistic Commission, essentially their Ministry of Culture. Before contact with Earth, they were sterile, joyless propagandists. But after exposure to human satire, they tried to mass-produce irony. You can't industrialize a scar. They misunderstood us from the beginning. They thought our humor was just entertainment. They never realized it was a pressure valve, one forged from centuries of pain, betrayal, failure, loss, and the sick, stubborn will to get up anyway. That misunderstanding is what undid them. The commission collapsed under the weight of its own content backlog. Artists began vanishing, either defecting or erasing themselves. Some uploaded final recordings that echoed like last rites. We copied your laughter, but we never asked why you needed it. That line played on repeat for hours in one transmission we intercepted. It wasn't a confession, it was a eulogy. On Earth, things weren't cleaner. Dead air had bought us time, but the cost was high. Generations raised on irreverence, on dark humor and chaotic memes, were now dealing with silence like a coffin lid. Depression surged. Creativity shriveled. Kids who once weaponized irony to process life were suddenly mute, disconnected. We had killed our own echo to starve the enemy, and in doing so, starved ourselves. But the older generation, the ones who remembered life before the viral age, they started talking again, not loudly, but with intent. They weren't trying to be funny, they were just being real. Old podcasters returned to record raw, unscripted messages, tales of failure, addiction, survival, grief. Artists painted with sincerity instead of sarcasm. Musicians dropped auto-tune and sang cracked, imperfect truths. And the most watched Earth broadcast post-silence? A man sitting in front of a campfire, saying nothing for 45 minutes. At the end, he looked into the lens and said, "I lost my son. Laughter kept me from killing myself. That's the truth." He signed off. No applause, no cut, just the fire crackling. That clip was banned in half the Olyari sectors, because they couldn't mock it. Then came the return of the original defector, Threk Vassal. He didn't come back in person, but he sent a data drop. Inside it? A full archive of the Olyari's internal memetic warfare files, every strategy they developed to manipulate human satire, every failed experiment, every synthetic campaign masked as fan-made. And at the center of it all was Adam, the original human comic. Turns out they'd been trying to replicate him ever since his broadcast destabilized their culture. They cloned him, studied him, even hired humans to rewrite his voice into something more manageable. They succeeded, at first. But then something happened. The clones stopped performing. They refused. In one case, a full replica stared into the camera for 9 minutes and said only one word. Why? That was the last Adam clone ever built. The project was terminated. They called it the unfunny core. They realized, too late, that human laughter wasn't programming. It was grief. Complicated, ugly, uncontrollable grief. And no one gets to fake that for long. The final transmission came 91 days after dead air, from the last functioning Oliari media node. The image was fractured, a glitching face, unsteady breath, an Oliari voice barely able to mimic emotion. But he tried. "You win," he said, "but not because you're smarter, or crueler, or louder. You win because you are the only species that laughs while bleeding. We copied the shape of your noise, but not the meaning. We thought your mockery made you strong, but it only hid the fact that you never healed." The screen flickered. Then he said something no one expected. "Teach us how to survive like you." And then he laughed. Not synthetically, not for effect, a real laugh. Short. Broken, tired. The kind of laugh you make at 4 a.m., when you're standing in the wreckage of your life and the absurdity of it all is the only thing keeping you upright. We didn't laugh back. We just listened. Because we understood. That was the end of the empire. Not a war, not a surrender, just a message, a crack in the armor, a shared, bitter laugh in the void, and silence afterward. But this time it wasn't empty. It was earned. You could almost believe it was over. The war, the mimicry, the psychological escalation. We watched it all rot and collapse under the weight of a truth the Empire never understood until it was too late. They'd mimicked the sound of us, but never the soul. And now that they knew that, they stopped trying to laugh. We won, or something like it. But victory didn't look like anyone expected. It looked like questions. It looked like guilt. It looked like a planet sitting in silence, wondering who the hell it was when no one else was watching. That's where we were. Post-war Earth. Not burned, not bombed, but bruised in ways we hadn't even begun to measure. I spent most of my time now in an old radio tower outside Nuuk. The Arctic winds kept the signals weak enough that the bureaucracy didn't bother regulating transmissions. Dead air protocols were still technically in place, but enforcement had thinned out. The people needed some voice again, and they wanted it slow, raw, uneasy. So I gave it to them. Every night, I sat behind the mic and spoke. No call-ins, no guests, no soundboard. Just me and a red, blinking light. I didn't try to be funny. Hell, I barely tried to be interesting. I just talked. About whatever scraped at the back of my skull that day. Grief, loneliness, the weird ache in your chest when you want to cry but your eyes are dry. That sort of thing. At first I thought no one was listening. But then the letters came. Real ones. Paper, ink, written by hand. Some arrived damp, torn by weather, sealed in plastic. Others were crisp, meticulous, always unsigned. They all started the same way. I didn't know anyone else felt this way. And that's when I realized it. This was the new war, not against fleets or false empires, but against the quiet that followed when your identity had been strip-mined for content. The Oliari didn't contact us again. Not directly, but signs trickled in, slowly, like waves lapping at the edge of a planet that no longer wanted to be found. First, it was a leaked visual, an Oliari city with no screens, not one. No artificial laughter, no satirical murals mocking Earth, just stone, sky, silence. Then came whispers from traders, smugglers mostly, who said some Oliari colonies were requesting pain recordings. That's what they called them. clips, audio logs, monologues of raw human grief. Not fiction. Not scripted trauma. Real things. Unpolished. Messy. They weren't laughing anymore. They were studying how to mourn. That shook something loose in me. I don't know why. Maybe because I knew how it felt to be so full of pain that even sadness felt like a direction worth chasing. That maybe, just maybe, they were trying to find something that wasn't about power or control. Maybe they were finally trying to become real. Back home, Earth was changing too. With dead air officially winding down, culture didn't spring back like people expected. It limped. It hesitated. Like we were afraid of ourselves. Our old influencers were silent, disgraced by their own parodies. The loudest voices were the quietest people. Mechanics who told honest stories. Farmers who blogged about losing crops and still waking up the next day. Veterans who finally admitted they weren't proud of what they'd survived. And our comedy? It didn't come back as punchlines. It came back as pauses, as that quiet chuckle between friends who knew what loss meant and didn't need a setup to feel it. We stopped performing, started processing, and it was hard. God, it was hard. The younger ones, those raised on irony like it was oxygen, they struggled the most. They didn't know how to live in a world where laughter wasn't a shield anymore. Where being sincere didn't get you mocked. Where you didn't win points for being the first one to sneer. I remember a kid writing to me, said he was 17, said he couldn't tell if he had emotions or if he was just playing out the script he thought emotions were supposed to follow. He ended the letter with, "Is this what it means to be real?" I didn't answer him, because I didn't know yet. Then came the first return broadcast from the Olyari. Not hostile, not even formal. Just a conversation. A real one. Between two of them, sitting in a small chamber. No music, no digital overlays. Just two beings talking about their fear. One of them admitted he hadn't laughed in months. The other said that was probably the first honest thing he'd ever said. And then, without irony, they started crying. It wasn't perfect. Hell, it was awkward. Uneven. But it wasn't for show. They'd figured out the part we never intended to teach, that the core of human resilience wasn't laughter. It was bearing pain without turning it into a weapon. The UN, what was left of it, voted to establish a neutral channel, one not controlled by Earth or the Empire, a place where people could speak, not perform, not broadcast, speak. They called it Signal Zero, and it was ugly, inconsistent, and uncomfortable, which made it real. It became the meeting place for two civilizations that had tried to destroy each other with satire. Now we just talked. One Olyari asked how we survived the Cold War without going extinct. Someone answered, "We didn't. We just changed the definition of survival." Another asked what love felt like. Someone uploaded a voicemail of a woman apologizing after a fight. Crying into a phone she thought no one would ever listen to again. And no one laughed. Not once. Because for the first time in recorded galactic history, there was nothing to prove. Just a silence we shared. I'm older now. Older than I ever thought I'd live to be. My voice doesn't have the weight it used to. But I keep talking. Not because I think it saves anyone, but because there's a kid out there, or an alien, or something in between, who still thinks silence means emptiness, and I need them to know the truth. Silence isn't absence. It's waiting. It's witnessing. It's the space between all the things that nearly killed you, and the fact that you're still here. The Empire didn't fall. We didn't rise, the galaxy didn't end, it just paused, like an old laugh echoing in a hallway too long to find the end of. And maybe that's enough. Peace doesn't arrive with trumpets. It arrives like a scar, quiet, unavoidable, familiar. By the time we realized we'd stopped fighting, most of us had already forgotten how to raise a fist. Not because we were weaker, but because the weapon we used, the weapon we were, was never built to last. Satire is a double-edged blade. It wounds your enemies, and yourself. And we'd been bleeding for years before the Olyari ever showed up. The difference now? We'd stopped pretending it didn't hurt. Signal Zero became a ritual. I checked in every week. Not to debate, not to argue, not to posture, just to listen. Sometimes I'd speak. I'd tell stories, real ones, personal ones, the kind I'd never said out loud before the war, things I'd buried under layers of cynicism and punchlines, because that's what the world trained men like me to do. Once, I told them about my father, about the day I found him sitting in the garage, engine running, hands still on the wheel, about how I laughed when I saw it, just a dry, broken laugh, because I couldn't process the grief any other way. That story stayed on the feed for 9 hours before a message came in from someone using the name Nervol, an Olyari, I guessed, based on the sentence construction. He said, "We do not laugh to mock. We laugh to deflect what we fear we cannot carry." And I realized then, they weren't trying to be human anymore. They were trying to be themselves, which meant maybe, so could we. Earth never recovered its old comedy. We tried, sure. Old shows were rebooted. Stage acts returned. Even late-night programming crawled out of the grave with fresh hosts and recycled formats. But the soul was gone. Not dead. Just changed. The laughter now came slower, gentler, more like relief than rebellion. People didn't clap at jokes. They nodded. They understood the cost. The best comedians weren't the cleverest anymore. They were the ones who admitted they didn't have it all figured out. Some guy named Will from Nova Scotia ran a show called Maybe It's Just Me that became one of the most watched streams in the solar system. He just sat in his room and talked about all the stuff he'd never said to anyone. His parents' divorce, his fear of dying, the time he lied about his sister's overdose because he didn't want to sound like a cliché. Sometimes he laughed, sometimes he didn't. People listened either way. And that felt like something new, something earned. As for the Olyari, no one really knew what they became. The empire fractured quietly. No war, no revolution, just separation. Some colonies restructured into communes, others became data sanctuaries, preserving cultural records not just of their own species, but of ours. There was even a place, somewhere in the Kavari cluster, that claimed to be the first grief library in the galaxy. Visitors could submit a memory they'd never shared. In return, they'd get one back, from someone else, anonymous. It was weird, it was beautiful, it was very human. I had the chance to meet one of them. Not through Signal Zero, not through a screen, in person. Her name was Illick, or at least that's what she said it translated to. She arrived with no security, no titles, just a pale travel suit and a notepad. An actual notepad. Paper and pen. She said digital recordings got in the way of remembering. She wanted to interview someone who was alive during the silence. I asked her why me, she said. Because you never tried to make it sound like a victory. That hit harder than it should have. We sat on a cliffside in northern Iceland, wind whipping between us, 2 thermoses of weak coffee between stronger silences. Illick asked questions. I answered. She didn't interrupt. She didn't smile, but she listened. Fully. Without trying to shape my answers into a better story. At the end of it, she said, "We thought satire was the tip of your sword, but now I think it was the blood leaking from your wound." And I nodded. Because what else could I say? One night, she asked me something different. Not about Earth, about her people. She said, "Do you think we deserve to survive?" I didn't answer right away, because I knew what she was really asking. She wasn't talking about justice, or vengeance, or politics. She was asking whether forgiveness meant erasing the past, or carrying it. I told her, survival isn't about deserving. It's about what you do with the second chance. She looked away then, toward the sky. We never brought it up again. Ilek stayed on Earth for 6 months. She recorded hours of conversations. Never once asked for permission. Never needed it. There was something honest about the way she asked things, like she wasn't there to document us, but to remember us. When she left, she didn't say goodbye. She left a note. We will carry the noise with us, not as a weapon, as a warning, and maybe a prayer. I still have it. Sometimes I read it when the world gets too quiet. Years passed. Signal Zero became the backbone of a new kind of diplomacy, not between governments, but between people. Entire civilizations tuned in not for power plays, but for perspective, for truth, for the things that don't make it onto banners or monuments. I still talk. Every now and then. Sometimes I tell jokes, but only when they matter. Only when they've cost something. The world laughs differently now, and maybe that's the point. I've come to believe the galaxy wasn't changed by the fact that humanity laughed, but by why we laughed. Because our humor wasn't cruelty, it was survival. Because when the last wall falls, when the ships leave, and the wars end, and the lies run out, all we really have left is the choice between screaming or smiling through the blood. And we chose the smile, even when our teeth were broken, even when our hands were shaking, even when we knew they'd never understand. Maybe now they do.